Welcome to The Hidden Truth, Breaking the Silence. I'm your host, Jonathan McLernon. Each episode we explore stories of individuals and how they've been affected by being a part of a secretive Christian fellowship. The stories shared here may include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Dysfunction happens when doctrine meets dogma and silence is paramount. So let's pull back the veil on today's episode of The Hidden Truth. All right, welcome to the show. It is my pleasure today to be hosting Sheri. I realized I should actually have figured out, is it Vandermyden Autry? Did I get that right?
Yes, sir.
I wanted to get the order of last names correct. So Sheri was a member of the church that I'm currently a part of for a period of time in her early life, and ended up leaving because of some things that happened to her. So we're going to explore Sheri's story and talk a little bit about how her experience with this fellowship led to her doing what it is that she's doing today. So welcome to the show, Sheri, and if you could just share a little bit about what it is you're doing currently.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and really appreciate it. I am currently one of three co-founders of Advocates for the Truth, and that evolved from my case, my legal case, from what had happened to me as a child. My legal case started last fall, and then through a chain of events, kind of mushroomed into a much bigger picture. And then that created Advocates for the Truth, which we are about exposure and protection for children, vulnerable adults within the community, and abuses that have been covered up for decades, including mine. I've been on my path of exposure about my abuse for 40 years now. This year is the 40-year anniversary of when I made my first ask for what I thought was right to be done.
So going back in time here, you were born and raised in this fellowship, is that correct?
Correct. I have 4 siblings. I'm the only girl, 4 brothers, born into it, and we are second generation. And I left when I was 17, when I had moved out.
So looking back kind of on your childhood, where did you grow up, and kind of what do you remember about it in the early years?
I was born in Southern California, moved up to Stockton area, raised throughout the valley. We did a lot of farming, and one of 5 siblings, being the only girl, I was the one in the house doing the cleaning, doing the laundry, always wanting to be out on the tractor doing the fun guy stuff. And that was much better than cleaning. And so it was interesting having 4 brothers, and it helped build my character and who I became as an adult, for sure.
Now, where do you fit in? Are you oldest, youngest, somewhere in the middle?
I have 1 younger brother.
Okay, and then three older ones.
Yes.
Okay, so you had maybe older brothers that would pick on you a little bit, but stuck up for you if anybody else dared do that.
Yes, and the 2 oldest brothers, they were old enough that we weren't super close. They were off into high school and whatnot. My youngest brother and I, and the brother just older than I, we were kind of the 3 that were tightest and fought the most. Yes.
yeah, as it happens. And so, so you grow up in the fellowship, you go to meetings, and at some point in time, you're exposed to an abuser who takes advantage of you. I think there will be people who wonder. So, and of course, as always, the disclaimer is you only share what you're comfortable sharing when we're chatting about these things, because these are difficult topics. But how old were you when the first time that you were abused?
By Steve Rohs in particular, who had abused me. I was 11, 12 years old when he started grooming me. Okay. And that was the year he was in our field.
Okay.
And the major extent of the abuse from him was 13 to 14 years old.
Okay. So, and for those who might be listening who aren't part of this fellowship, so Steve Rohs was a worker, that is a minister of the gospel within his fellowship. And so he started grooming you. Now, the term grooming has started to get more use in recent years, but it's one that probably wasn't widely used for a number of years. So for those who might be unfamiliar, how would you, in your words, describe like what grooming is? And then perhaps you can share a little bit about, you look back and say, like, what were his grooming behaviors?
So being a country girl, I think in country terms, and so I kind of liken it to checking a gate. Is the
Okay.
gate latched? Will it swing open? Is the gate wide open from the get-go? And grooming is checking that gate. Hey, can I get through a little bit? Can I squeeze through the gate? Can I just come full bore through the gate? And those are all actions of just checking a little bit further how much more into your space, your bubble can they go. And for me, it was a lot of flattery. Again, being raised with farming, a very defined role as a female, to get that attention and affirmation was a very big part of the grooming process, because I was very shy. I had became more introverted after the abuse, but I was just a scrawny little 80-pound soaking wet little scrawny girl that any attention from a male was very, very flattering. So there was a lot of flattery, the little side hugs that became big hugs, kissing. And those were all grooming actions.
Right. So kind of like just testing what are you comfortable with. Now, as a bit of a backdrop, would you have classified your parents as strict adherents to, I guess, the tenets of the fellowship? Were they rule followers, or were they a little bit more relaxed about it? And then sort of as a connection to that, how like were workers held in high esteem?
They were held in very high esteem, and the home I was raised in was very strict. If the workers called and said, hey, can we come over tonight? Even though there was 5 kids, we were farming, had a lot on the table, the home was immediately opened and everything was organized to perform that host duty.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there was a lot of, they were held in very, very high esteem, and their decisions were not questioned. What they said or spoke was, it was gospel. That's what we did. And my perception of it was, do not ever question that authority. And yeah, if they called, beds were ready.
Right. And of course, we can look back on that now through the lens of adulthood and adult experience, and you're no longer a part of the fellowship, and you can look back and think like, wow, a lot of this stuff seems kind of, I want to say like almost ridiculous, the way that it was, the way that they're sort of held in this unquestioned regard. But part of why that takes place is, the idea behind these homeless itinerant ministers going to preach the gospel is that they're called by God to do this. And when you put a label like called by God to preach the gospel, it then can bring into it this idea of, well, we can't question what it is that they do. And so when this man, Steve Rohs, who was a worker at the time, comes into your home, and it's like, well, this is a man called by God to preach the gospel. So we can't really question what it is that he does. When he started like showing you affection and attention, was there any question in your mind like, I'm not sure if this is right, or was it just, this is really great, I appreciate receiving this affection?
Initially, before the really intense abuse started, it was very affirming to me, and there were not boundaries that were crossed during the grooming process, to the best of my recollection, that would have made me feel bad. It was just more, he was such a celebrity, 6'6", very charismatic. It was very much a seduction of child sex abuse. So here's a celebrity, and he's paying attention to me.
Right. Okay.
When he came back to rest with us, then the gate was fully open then.
Okay. So here we have like a charismatic speaker who's a tall, like imposing authority figure. I don't know the man. Like, was he like a really good speaker and people like revered him because of his ability to speak and hold people's attention, or was it just merely the fact that he was a worker?
A combination. Very charismatic, could sell ice to Eskimos. Everybody loved him. All the older girls had crushes on him. So, and I knew all that. So to have him give this little tiny girl the attention and the affection, that was very significant to me.
Mm-hmm. And how long did the grooming phase take place? I know people's individual experiences, but when you look back, because you mentioned there's a point where it became an escalation. It goes from being grooming to now being like open sexual abuse. How long did the like sort of grooming phase take place, and then what was the escalation?
So the grooming phase would have been the year that he was in our field. And so he stayed with us quite a bit. And I want to say it was 79, 80 that he was in our field. So that's when the grooming and the checking that gate, see how far those boundaries were. And then when he came back, he specifically asked to come to our home to rest, to take out time off from ministry. Right. And he had specifically written to our family, and I am dead set certain that was premeditated.
Yeah.
He already had his eye on the target. And I say that because within a night or two of him being at our house, then the abuse started. And that's where then the feelings of, oh, this is something wrong. People can't find out. I'll get in trouble.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I think this is a really important point that you highlight here is all of a sudden, so now the boundaries are crossed. And I think it's actually a really great analogy, like checking the gate. And he sort of set everything up. Was there a gap from the time that he was in your field to the time he came to rest, or was it like a 1 year gap, or?
Yeah, so it was 79 or 79, 80, the year he was in our field. And then he came to our house 82.
Okay. So yes. it almost like a celebrity is like coming back. Haven't seen him for a while. Were you excited at the prospect of him coming?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. He was a very charismatic, very engaging, popular. So yeah, it was exciting. And of course, I didn't realize that an abuse was happening to me, that I was a victim of a crime in process.
Right.
Because of the way he had groomed me and my family, because predators spend as much time, if not more time, grooming the community and the families as they do the victim.
Yeah, that's a super important point there. We think that grooming happens only to victims, but it's also essentially winning over everyone around them, building. And this is why I think when stories like this start to come out, it's like, that's not possible. That's not the person that we know, because there's like another hidden face to it. The public face, the behaving well, the charisma, the charming people, and so on. The speaking eloquently, preaching the gospel and sounding very sincere when doing so. And for those who are not prey, this individual would seemingly just be a very like godly man who is really quite something to be around. And so the abuse escalated into sexual abuse within a couple of nights of him arriving at your home. And now you're feeling a sense of something's really wrong here. But now, did he say to you, if you tell anyone about this, you'll be in trouble? Did he frame it that way, or?
How it was framed was, your family would be mad if they knew right now, but we will get married when you're old enough.
Ooh.
So back to that whole seduction thing, and you have this very vulnerable child that I just completely fed into that. And as a victim, oh, okay, this person should be trusted. He's held in high esteem. I can trust him with this, even though every night it was him sneaking to my room or having me go to his room. And you have to understand, you don't have to understand, but to give you a little bit of background, it was a 4,200 square foot ranch style home. My bedroom was at one end of the home, right next to my parents' room. His was at the very other end. So it wasn't like just slip into one room from the other room. There was a lot of risk involved just in the transit to get from one end of the house to the other. And when I looked at the house just recently, physically went out and looked at it, it really hit me as an adult. Wow. The manipulation that I was under, and the fear of me getting caught, because it would have been me, from my perspective back then, I would have been the one in trouble. He's the person in high regard. He is the person to be respected. I am the one that would be doing something wrong in my parents' eyes.
Right. Yeah. And this is one of the most, I just get like chills thinking about it. Like, it's one of the most insidious aspects of this, that like an adult man who knew exactly what he was doing versus a vulnerable child who had been groomed, and it's the child that gets the blame for, I don't know, being a naughty child, being a rebellious child, or whatever. And I think it's so helpful, and I really want to acknowledge the fact that you're sharing in more detail than probably many would. It gives us a little bit more of an understanding of like what actually takes place. Because I think an outside observer who has never experienced abuse would look at the behaviors of someone who's caught in the trap of a predator who's grooming them, and an outside observer who's not trapped in it can say, well, why don't you just like say something or do something? But it's hard to understand the mindset of a child in a situation like that. And so I appreciate you sharing a little bit more insight about that. I think it's really, it's powerful to hear that. So he would he would also convince you to come to his room. And it was like, this is our little secret. This is our secret relationship. And so did it have like at that time, because he was, again, you weren't aware that really this is a criminal predatory behavior. Was it like this, I don't know, element of excitement, or was it fear that sort of kept this going? And maybe how long did this go on for?
It was a combination of those emotions: fear, excitement, validation. Oh, I am somebody. If this celebrity, so to speak, is paying attention to me, oh, I must be something special. So it fed a lot of my needs, and that's what predators do, is they can hone in on who is vulnerable. That is exactly why he came back to our house. She's vulnerable. I felt overshadowed by this family of boys, and I was there to fill a purpose, was how my perspective was. And to be flattered and seduced by somebody like that was very big. And then there was also the feelings of shame. I very distinctly remember one day we were hauling cotton to the cotton gin. I had ridden in the truck with him, and he wanted to make out. And so we're there making out, and I'm thinking, you are on my dad's payroll. This is so wrong. That was my thought. Don't do it on the clock. Because we are making a living. We're scratching as farmers. This is wrong. And I very distinctly remember that day of feeling, no, it's on the time clock. We shouldn't be messing around.
Right. Was this the first sort of inkling, like this needs, like, this needs to change for you? Because it's almost
Oh
like
no.
you were in a trance. So, like, I don't know if it'd be accurate to say that, like, when someone who's been groomed, like you're caught in this situation, you're caught up in what is a lie that they've cultivated over, you know. So, but you just thought, hey, this shouldn't be happening on the clock, you know, because, you know, but it's okay that this happens outside of it. I guess what I'm trying to get to is where was the point where something went, okay, this cannot continue?
Well, that didn't happen till he left, because see, it was so framed that he was my boyfriend
Right.
and that
Oh,
I was
cool.
his
Yeah.
girlfriend. And
Right.
that's where the song, the Hall and Oates song, he used that on me, Man Eater. And so it was that I was this seductress, and I mean, I was still a child. I had not started to develop it yet as a woman. There was
Mm-hmm.
nothing about me as a human that was womanly. I was a girl.
Okay.
And he was a 28-year-old man. He's 6'6", 28-year-old man. And here I am, 13, 14 years old. And it was so framed that I was his girlfriend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Everything about the situation is terrible. Like, I actually have a shiver down my spine thinking about it. Like, it's just everything about it is so wrong. And so he stayed with your family for how long?
From the end of October to the end of December.
And
And
did
go
did
ahead.
did it ever like slip out? Did anyone ever have an inkling? Anyone in your family have an inkling that this was taking place, or was he exceptionally good at keeping it hidden?
Exceptionally good at keeping it hidden. No one ever knew. Now he would call once he left. Because he left like December 20th
Mm-hmm.
and of 82, and then he would call our house from time to time. And I remember the call. He called one day, inviting us to his wedding, and that just spun me out.
No kidding. Right.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And looking back, I think he was calling to see if anybody had an idea. My brothers,
Oh,
my parents had no idea. And my parents did see changes in me, and they didn't understand, because I had, for the most part, been a pretty, I think, decent kid to raise. And, so I'm going from 14 to 17. All girls are a little bit off the rails on some
yeah. Well,
days.
yeah. There's the emotional development that's taking place that is sometimes, could we say, like, chaotic and unpredictable. Your body's changing, your hormones are changing, your brain is changing, like physically you're developing, like all of these things, and without really the emotional maturity to navigate it, independently. This is why I think this is why we kind of have parents, is to help us, or ideally to help us navigate this unpredictable situation in life. Um, and so he calls, he's testing the waters to see, did anybody find out about this taking place? You hear he's getting married. So the illusion is now shattered. This man, we're never going to get married. Whatever we had is over. Um, kind of what happens for you next?
Well, at that point in time, I felt very betrayed.
Yeah.
The betrayal, and then the anger, and I kept it to myself, what had happened, because I didn't want to get in trouble, because I had been doing the nasty, so to speak, and I was the one who would be responsible, not him, because he's a respected worker.
Right.
And it was the beginning of 86 when one day I had said, to my parents, I said, well, if you knew who Steve Rohs was, you wouldn't like him at all, or something to that effect. And so the next day, my mom came in and asked, well, when are you going to tell me about Steve Rohs? She put two and two together, that something had happened just from my statement the day before, and looking back, hey, what was this change? And in April, I'm going to jump back just a minute to give a bit of insight. In April of 83, my dad had given my mom a beautiful watch for her birthday or April 1st.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was a complete terrorist about it and just ugly. And looking back when I was in counseling, I was like, oh, so this is how people are supposed to be treated that are loved. And I thought I was. And so all this anger that I didn't even know, couldn't put words to it. Because at that time, I still didn't realize a crime had been committed to me. I thought I was just a jilted girlfriend. Right. So when I told my parents what had happened, they immediately believed me. There has been abuse in our family with other family members. Right. So you kind of can sense it. And they completely believed me, got me into a counselor straight away who I did reconnect with this last year. And she really changed the path of my life. Her and my English teacher, who my English teacher let me do an I-search paper as my senior paper on the effects of molestation.
So, and if I could just zoom out a little bit here, in it, like, did you, because of course this is also framed in the context of being a part of this, the fellowship, or the 2x2 church. But was there a point in time where you had professed and were an active participant within the church, or was all of this kind of going on, did you feel like you couldn't do that?
No, I was professing up until I moved out of the house. Yep. Okay. When I moved out of the house, then I left it all.
And then this was taking place in the fall. Were you going to high school at the time? And was this like, did you ever share with anybody that this was taking place?
When I was being abused?
Yeah.
No. So from when the abuse started in October of 82 to January of 86, I do not recall ever telling one single person.
So you kept the secret for those years, and and so now you tell your parents, hey, this is what's taking place, and they immediately believed you. So now of course, hindsight being 2020, and I don't let's say I don't like to try to attach like future hindsight to like past experience in a sense, but when they believed you, did it come out there like, we should have seen this, or how did your parents respond, like, to knowing this had taken place with you?
They were very supportive of me. Like I said, they didn't ever doubt me. They sent a letter to Eldon Tanniswood, the California overseer, immediately, who ironically, even though David and Mary Jo knew him, there was never any doubt, any question, which always has led me to believe this wasn't the first issue that they'd had with somebody. Because naturally, I think it would be, wow, tell me more about it, or, oh my goodness, this is a surprise, or I didn't see it coming from that person. There was not a trace of that. Not one trace of surprise or shock at all.
Right. Because, I listened to how you describe this man's behavior, and I think, I wonder how many, like, girls he targeted like this, and for how long as well, using this position of authority, as well as his sort of natural physical gifts or charisma or things like that to do this. Because you absolutely would not have been the only one. And so did he leave the work of his own volition, or did he leave the work because stories were starting to seep to the surface?
That's a great mystery. When he came to rest from the ministry at our house, it was because he had dietary needs. So he had to use this special diet. And so a whole separate meal had to be cooked for him, which, looking back, why would you go to a family with 5 kids and put a special diet on that agenda for the family?
Yeah.
So I've talked to several people trying to get to the bottom of that, and have never received a cut and dried answer as to why. If it was there was more to the story, or if it was the dietary thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you said pardon me, age 17, you left home. Your parents have been supportive. Were you like angry about the situation? Did you, at that age, were you able to connect some dots and realize like the fellowship or the structure, the hierarchy, how things were set up had been like a catalyst for this kind of behavior being able to occur? Or was it just, actually, I'll just kind of leave it at that. What was your sense of things at 17 when you left home?
There was some anger, and it took quite a while to process the fact that I was a victim of a crime.
Mm-hmm.
To change that mindset over from a young girl to a young adult and understand that a crime had been committed on me.
Mm-hmm.
That took some time. I don't think I fully realized the organization's participation in the cover up until when I went to the DA's office down in Tulare County and talked to them. And at that point in time, they told me, they're going to ring you through. It's going to be really rough going through court.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to put you through the ringer, going to ask you every detail about it. I chose not to. I was not able to, as a 17 and a half year old, to do that. But what I did ask at that point in time, you guys go back to every home he ever stayed in and you find the other victims. And then they brought him to our house to apologize. And it was terrible. It was terrible to bring him into our home, which is supposed to be a sanctuary, which is supposed to be a safe place, and brought him with a couple other workers, and he apologized, and it was complete BS. And I told him, the only reason you're apologizing is because you got caught. If you were truly sorry for what you had done, you would have apologized a long time ago. And there was a lot of language, even though there were workers there. I just let my language go. And
Good.
I was hot. I was really hot about it. And again, asked, you guys go to every home. That was never done. Now, Eldon did ask my mom, do you know of any other victims? And so she reached out to some people. But it was never asked of Eldon, do you know of other people? What have you done? Even though that was my request.
So at this time, Eldon, so for those who, again, listening who might not be unfamiliar, this is Eldon Tanniswood, and at the time was he the overseer of California?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And so, yeah, and for those listening, the overseer is essentially like we call it the head minister kind of thing. It would be like I don't know, a bishop, or might have like a priest, and then you would have like a or a deacon, a priest, a bishop, that kind of thing. And so yeah, the overseer manages essentially all of the workers in whatever geographic area he's overseeing. And so I guess it's easier. It's hard to say specifically, but like when you think about like him trying to find out from you, or if there are more victims, was there ever any, back then this is pre-internet, was there any communication with fields, with elders, with anything like that this individual has a history or pattern of behavior that is criminal?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There were a lot of workers who knew about it. Ed Alexander, Harold Hilton. I mean, there were a lot of workers who were aware of what went on, and that knew that he admitted to molesting me. And I only found this out in the last year, but 6 years after he admitted to molesting me, they promoted him to being an elder and having meeting in his home, which he had meeting in his home up until our website went out in April of this year. Is the first time that people in his field were told by us, by AFTT, that they were meeting with a pedophile.
Oh man! So for that sounds like almost 30 years, this guy had a meeting in his home as an elder, and again a respected position of authority.
Yes, sir.
Oh my gosh. Like, honest. Like, I know I look back now, but I'm like, what were they thinking?
Well, unfortunately, it's a very consistent theme.
Yeah, as we've uncovered. So if we sort of shift back to your story, and so you said, because I wanted to highlight something else here that I think is really, really important for people to hear. So you went to the DA's office, said, like, I've been a victim of a crime. You're now 17 years old, so you're aware that this is a crime that took place. But when they described, here's what would happen if you were to go to court to try to prosecute this man for the crimes he's committed, like, you're going to be almost on trial. In fact, you are going to be really on trial here because you have to try to prove his guilt, which means that everything that took place is going to get dragged out. All the nitty gritty graphics details are going to get dragged out. Their lawyers are going to challenge your character. Like, and you're 17 years old, and it sounds like you're developing a bit more of a bit more strength of character. And I think now I know that you've got a feisty side to you, which is why you're fighting so hard now, which is absolutely incredible. I'm so glad you're doing this. But is it like what sort of ran through your head when they said, okay, this is what it would be like if we try to put this man on trial?
I'm out. I am processing this myself. The change from being seduced to being a victim of a crime, I'm processing all that. There's no way that I could explain that I had butterflies on my underwear and what my pajamas looked like and how he touched me and how far it went. There was no way I could put myself through that at that age. And then the statute of limitations for California back at that time had cut off by the time I was 25, which I still was not in a place mentally or emotionally to be able to go through that. In a room full of strangers, bearing my soul, everything that had happened to me physically, mentally, emotionally.
Yeah. No, and this is like one of the most, like, I feel a visceral reaction in my gut as I'm picturing you, like someone like basically saying this is what you would have to go through to bring this man to justice. And I understand that, of course, we have a justice system for a reason, and to try to prevent the false accusations and things like that. But as we know, statistically speaking, like, especially when a child is involved, that the likelihood of a false accusation it is tiny. And so it's awful to think that that's what you would have to go through. And so at what point did you leave the fellowship and say, that's it, I'm out? I don't want anything to do with this. And maybe it's an obvious question, but like, the abuse that took place, is that like the catalyst for this?
Not so much for leaving it. My understanding of a relationship with God was that being a teenager at that time, I was a normal teenager, nothing bad, rebellious, but it's like, well, if I'm going to hell, I might as well go to hell wearing makeup and cutting my hair. So I'm leaving.
Right.
Because those are rules you want to do. Yeah, those are rules. Yeah. And if God can't accept me with shorter hair and makeup, then, well, heck, I'm going there anyway. So it was more that than the way that the abuse was handled. Though down the road, I was able to look at how the organization handles it. And that just solidified my feelings about the organization.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, how old were you once you left? And like, did anybody ever reach out or try to ask you or provide any kind of support or anything like that? Or were you like a shunned pariah once you left? And I know it's kind of a bigger question, but I guess I'm looking like, how did your family deal with it? How did maybe others who would have known you in the church deal with it? What was that like for you?
No one reached out to me. No. And I had moved from Oregon down to California. So I was completely out of the community geographically that I had been in. And so no one reached out to me, and that was okay with me. I really didn't want anything to do with it.
Fair enough. Yep. Now your parents and your siblings, I don't know. Are your parents, actually didn't ask you before the call, before the interview? Are your parents still alive? And if so, like, did they continue to be part of the fellowship?
Yes, my dad passed last year. He was in the fellowship until his death, and my mom still is. Mary Jo still is.
Okay. Yeah. And so, all through the years, I mean, I know that when somebody leaves a fellowship, it can, not always, but often it will change sort of the dynamic of the relationship. And did your siblings, your brothers, did any of them profess, and do any of them continue to do so?
None of them are professing. The last sibling that left was probably 8 years ago, about
Mhm.
8 years ago, and left the fellowship. And there was a situation 13 years ago that really opened my eyes to the organization and their cover up of it.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah. So you left, you kind of carried on with your life, and we're fast forwarding a little bit here. But there came a point in time where maybe you felt like, I need to start fighting for this again, or like, and what year did that start for you? And what prompted you to say, hey, I need to start doing something about this again?
It was in 2010, and I was sitting at a Padres game, and the Man Eater song came on. And I got up and just started
Ooh,
pacing the stadium. And
yeah.
I went home, and I knew that I had unresolved issues. And I've been in and out of counseling for the last 40 years. And so I wrote an email, and this was a huge turning point. It was 2010. And I wrote an email to Steve, and then I blind carbon copied 900 other members, including workers, overseers. There was very minuscule. I think maybe one worker reached back out to me after receiving the email, and it went viral. I didn't know it, but I had sent it out 2 weeks before a convention in California. And
Mhm.
so it was very well known. For back in the day, it went viral. It went onto the truth
Yeah.
meeting boards, wings, and whatnot.
Mhm.
And that's when I really realized the efforts they go to sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
And
And
I
this is
was on
2010. This isn't like the 1980s at this point. This is 2010. Like, not. I mean, it feels like it's not that long ago.
right. And there was a ripple effect. Word got out, even up in Idaho where he was living with his kids, and that's what I wanted, was word to get out. Hey, you are meeting with a pedophile, an
Mhm.
admitted pedophile. Nothing was, and that was a very for me. And the lack of support, the Ed Alexander, who was pretty much the CSA spokesperson, everybody kept driving me back to him, and he just couldn't remember anything, which lo and behold, he had the Eldon Tanniswood letters from the 80s. And I'm just asking for information. Help me put pieces together. Were there other victims that you've come across? And I was just stonewalled. And that was a really difficult time to be victimized again by the organization.
Right, because I imagine you would then be perceived as like a troublemaker, someone who's coming in trying to, I don't know, tear things down, or when, I imagine, and maybe I shouldn't speak for you, but in my mind, I picture you're trying to right a wrong, essentially, and trying to prevent other people from being hurt and abused by speaking up.
Absolutely. And my thing has always been, if I can prevent one child and from being harmed, and if I can help one survivor have the courage to go get help, then I've turned something bad into something good. And that's why I am so passionate about sharing my story and exposing, because otherwise, as a survivor, it's really easy to feel alone. And that was one of the
Mm-hmm.
things about going up against Steve in court back in the day.
Hmm.
He, for me to go, and even though he had admitted it, it was all going to be twisted and turned. How do I overcome this obstacle? Today,
Right.
bring it on.
Right. Yeah. But you think like back then, again, imposing figure, just physically imposing, charismatic. I've never seen a picture, but maybe he's good looking. And you know what's ironic is when we when someone who is perceived as attractive is in court, they tend to be judged more favorably than someone who is perceived to be unattractive. And again, when someone can be well spoken, like it does and it can influence the jury or the judge. Now, you said something else, and I kind of wanted to just get a little bit of a snapshot into that as well. So you had to go through counseling, or were kind of in and out of counseling to help people kind of understand the nature of like what abuse does to a person. Were there any particular, like, some people might turn to drugs or to alcohol or things like that. Did you happen to develop any particular behaviors that were connected to because this had happened to you? And what was, in your case, maybe what was the counseling to try and help to work through? Even though it sounds like a very obvious question, I guess.
Well, yeah. My first marriage was a 10-year very abusive marriage, physically, emotionally,
Oh,
mentally.
wow.
And I have two beautiful, amazing daughters out of that marriage. But that abusive marriage was a direct result of my abuse as a kid. I was used to abuse. That's what I was worthy of. I wasn't worthy of anything better. So in and out of counseling, and by the grace of God, I never was in an abusive relationship since. I left the cycle of abuse because of counseling.
Mm-hmm,
and after the letter 13 years ago, and I was, and my first counselor gave me something that has been a nugget throughout my life. This is not something, as a survivor, it's not something we can put off our checklist. Okay, I've dealt with that, I'm done.
Right.
She said, because I am a list person, I want to get it done and move on with the rest of my life. She said, you will deal with this the rest of your life. It's peeling an onion. And you'll get to another situation in life, and you're going to take another layer of that damage off of you. So be prepared that you're going to have to, you don't get to, in order to be healthy, you do not get to say, okay, I've done counseling, I'm done with this. So she prepared me that my life would be in and out of counseling. As I healed through that layer of the onion, then there was another one. But the 13 years ago in 2010, that did lead to a lot of damage, a lot of hurt. And as a result of that, I did end up drinking very heavily because I just wanted to numb the yuck of the being silenced, of it doesn't matter. We dealt with it. Here I am screaming to protect and to expose. And they're saying, shut up. Just a hand in the face.
Oh, yeah. And so again, I think you've touched on some really, really important things that I again want to shine a light on, because I want people listening to this to really truly understand. One is that this isn't just something that you get over.
No.
There's this idea that happened years ago. It's like, no, it's just written into a part of your brain. This happened at a time when your brain was really developing. It affects like the development of the maturation of your brain, because you went through an experience that was abnormal. And so an outsider would look at, for example, you said you end up in an abusive relationship, and an outsider would look back, someone who doesn't understand this would look at this and go, well, why'd you do that? And it's like, it's hard for someone who hasn't experienced this to understand that like your brain had been damaged by the abuse. And so, as you said in your words, like that was what you were worthy of, that kind of treatment in a relationship. And so because of at that point in time your sense of self-worth, you felt like this was just acceptable. What I'm curious about is what gave you the strength. Again, at what point did something click and you go, I cannot keep doing this? Because you mentioned 10 years, and then what gave you the strength, and what helped you to break free from that? Because that takes incredible like courage to do that. It's not an easy thing to do.
No, and it was a very clear and concise moment. He, like I said, he was physically abusive, and the kids had been exposed to him hitting me one day. And I very clearly knew that day, if my kids ever came to me as adults and said that they had been abused, it was entirely my fault, because I was raising them that was normal and acceptable behavior. And I literally had just started a job in real estate, served him with a restraining order, $500 in my pocket, and started off on my own with 2 kids, no child support. But it was so clear that it was my responsibility, that I was teaching them what is normal. And I would have that on my hands, that blood on my hands, if I kept them in that.
And what ages were your children at that time?
Pardon? 5 and 7. 5 and 7.
Wow. That takes serious courage to do that. And so here we are today. There's so much more to explore in your story. My goodness. You're one heck of a woman. You have come through so much. Fast forward to the development of the Advocates for the Truth. And I think this was like the hand of God. March 21st, 2023. What happened?
And yes, I completely agree. It is the hand of God. And I can look back to January 3rd of last year. The hand of God was working ahead. That was the last day it was your birthday?
Yeah.
I remember that every year, because that's the day I stopped drinking and I started counseling, thinking that I was going to counseling for drinking heavy. And it was actually another layer of this onion. And so God was working upstream back January 3rd of 22. And so then jump to March 23rd of this year, Lauren and I had gone to Canby to meet Cynthia, who we'd been working with since November of last year. We had been going to meet her face to face. And on the morning of the 23rd, oh my gosh, here's the news of the Dean Brewer letter.
Now, I just want to pause for one sec, because you mentioned Lauren and Cynthia, and I'm curious how they came into the picture, because and for those who are listening to this, you will hear on other episodes Lauren's story and Cynthia's story as well. But how did the three of you come together? Because I think this too is really quite something. And of course, we'll let Lauren tell her story, but I just want to know how you two got together and how Cynthia came into the picture.
Yes, it's a phenomenal story. Lauren's sister had seen my 2010 email on the internet. Because of the song in there, she knew it was about her dad. Lauren is my perpetrator's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Lauren reached out to me in 2020, and so we formed a friendship and a common bond, being victims of the same perpetrator.
Mm-hmm.
Last August, my brother told me, hey, the statute of limitations, there's a look back window in California for criminal and civil charges, and don't know if you want to do anything with it. And so he sent me a link to an attorney in Florida. That attorney in Florida works with Cynthia all the time. Cynthia had seen my letter on her desk back in 2010. Someone had said, hey, it looks like the church you were raised in. This attorney in Florida in November of last year, October, November, reached out to Cynthia and said, hey, here's this same case again on the table. Cynthia and I connected. Lauren and I were already working together and starting on our legal and civil stuff. Meet Cynthia, who was from this attorney in Florida, which we all know a lot of mutual people. And so that's how we had been working together, was on my criminal and civil cases as well as Lauren's. So from New York, Texas, Florida to Oregon, all these common threads brought us together. And Cynthia's not able to travel. We wanted to meet each other face to face. We'd been working together for 5 months, and she wasn't able to travel. So we said, let's go out to see her.
Mm-hmm.
It was no accident that we were all together.
Yeah. And so it said March 21st, 2023, the three of you ladies are together discussing things. Little did you know that 48 hours later, a massive scandal was going to bust loose.
Yes, it was pretty ironic, and that Doyle Smith was literally staying 40 minutes away from where we were at. And we met with him for 3.5 hours that night.
And so, and then I'm not sure what you were able to share from that meeting. So Doyle Smith, again, for those listening, is a worker. I don't know, is he overseer or is he just a senior worker, or?
He's the overseer that took Dean Brewer's place.
Right. So Dean Brewer was the overseer, and those who've watched the trailer for this podcast series, you'll have seen his name mentioned. He is the minister who he passed away in June of 2022, I believe it was, but in March of 2023, it exploded publicly. Now, this has been known secretly for a number of months, but it exploded publicly. This man was a serial, brutal sexual predator. And so now you're sitting down. This breaks publicly because a letter that wasn't necessarily intended to be shared publicly became public, and all of a sudden the floodgates open. So now you sit down, Doyle Smith. This man's an overseer, and so here he is sitting with three women outside of the fellowship, one an investigator and two victim survivors. What was it like sitting down with him? And because I'm kind of curious, did you have much contact with the friends, the fellowship workers, things like that? Or were you kind of, you mentioned being like shunned and stonewalled for a number of years as you're trying to work through this. What was that like when you got to sit down with him, and how receptive was he, if at all?
Well, interestingly, I had talked to several overseers and workers from August of last year up till March. So my expectations of getting honest, open answers was not very high. Mm-hmm. So I walked in expecting kind of what I'd already gotten from Rob Newman, Jeff Thayer, Ed Alexander, Harold Hilton in the last several months. I had that, walked in with that same expectation. And one of my biggest things was, in the letter, he said that on the laptop there was incriminating evidence. My biggest thing in that meeting was, do you still have the laptop? And if so, it needs to go to law enforcement. That took some talking him into doing it. He didn't want to do it. Wanted to pray about it, and I let him know he could pray with or without the laptop. And
it's a great way of putting it. You don't need all of that. So, and what was his reasoning or his hesitation for passing into law enforcement? That he maybe stated. I have a pretty good idea of what it would be, but what did he state or tell you guys?
I don't clearly remember his reason why not to, but I clearly remember his different solutions of other things rather than, he could send it to Montana to one of the friends there that could search for incriminating evidence. Or he wanted to talk to some of the other workers before he handed it over to law enforcement. And it was only after it was explained to him, if there is child porn on the device and you get in a car wreck, you are in possession of child porn and you will be the one facing charges. And at that point, he decided that it would be okay to call law enforcement and have them come pick it up, which they did not do that night because it was out of their jurisdiction. And he delivered it to Clackamas County the next morning. And we followed up with multiple phone calls. Lauren did a great job on her follow-up that morning.
Mm-hmm. And we'll explore more of that, or you'll hear more about that in my conversation with Cynthia. But I love getting to hear that from your perspective as well. And so moving forward, you and Cynthia and Lauren formed the organization Advocates for the Truth. And what is your mission ultimately that you want to accomplish this? Because I imagine people will hear this, and I can't imagine like kind of maybe the blowback you've gotten, the nasty stuff you might have gotten from some people who have thought you're trying to tear things down or blow things up or whatever. But really, so what is your mission, and how have you found it being received?
Our mission is the same that I've been on for 40 years, to create exposure of the predators, the pedophiles, the adult sexual abuse, expose that, and then offer protection, offer a safe arena for survivors to come forward where they're going to be heard, be believed, and have resources available. So we do have resources available through our own 501c3. And then we've partnered with 2 other completely independent. Money does not go through AFTT at all. Those provide resources for people to get counseling. So that's all part of the protection for survivors, to get them the help that we all need as survivors.
It's amazing, and I mean, I think it's absolutely incredible work that you ladies are doing. Honestly, I'm so deeply grateful for what you're doing, and how, I think about like how voraciously you have fought, like, 4 people inside a fellowship that all of you have been touched by but are no longer a part of. And here I am at this point in time. I haven't been kicked out, but here you are fighting for this. And I think, like, I have a toddler and an infant, a newborn, and I think, like, if I'm going to stay like a part of this fellowship, because there are aspects of it that I like, and I think if people watch the trailer, you'll see I actually speak a little bit about this. Like, why be a part of this when I know all of this is taking place? I'm so grateful that you have fought so hard for this that I'm currently a part of and haven't been kicked out for producing this series. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to really be able to share your story. I'm kind of curious, just as we get near the end of this here, where do you stand on? You've mentioned God, and if I'm not mistaken, you're wearing a cross. I'm kind of curious where you stand on kind of like your beliefs in around Christianity, God, and so on, after having experienced what you did. I'll leave it there and just hear your thoughts.
Yes. Well, and I forgot one thing I was going to say, because I am a Christian and I do have a relationship with God, and it is not my mission at all to destroy a fellowship. And I strongly believe that anything of God cannot be torn down by man. Are there some structural things that need to change? Absolutely. Because it's a perfect breeding ground for predators. But yes, I am a strong Christian. I went to a Amway conference in my early 20s and went to the Sunday service where the keynote speakers were going to be. And I thought, okay, I'm walking into hell already, because we're not supposed to go to any of these false religions. But I was very fed. On the way home, I thought the plane was going to fall out of the sky, because I had gone to another church, and started getting my eyes opened to a relationship with God. And that is very different. Spirituality, relationship with God, for me, is very different than religion. And my upbringing, I looked at it as a religion, not as a relationship with God. And I know people are at all different parts of their journey. I don't ever want to preach and trigger people, whatever we're all I believe in freedom of religion. But I also, for me, have a very close relationship with God. And I don't think that needs to be dictated by a church name, a church building. It's a one-on-one.
I love that. Well, if I could give you a big hug, I would, just to say thank you so much. And also just for what you've shared today, like for being so open, for receiving all of my questions so openly. Your willingness to share and to share some of the details that will maybe be difficult for other people to share, will maybe give them the courage to take the steps they are able to, so that we can ultimately bring these perpetrators to justice, and we can create a safe environment for people to practice their faith as they best see fit. So as we close out, last thing, I'll let you close out the episode. Are there any words of wisdom or words of encouragement that you would like to share?
Well, first, thank you very, very much for your part in exposing. that is what you are doing is huge, and I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. And I think to let people know that they are not the only ones, and it is scary to acknowledge the damage that's been done, but the benefits of acknowledging it, of opening that can of worms, is absolutely life-changing. And the journey of healing is varied for every one of us. The most important part is to be on the journey towards healing and give yourself grace, and to really reach out and find a good support system where you can really let your walls down, be safe and trust, and life can be really, really good. And even though bad things happen to us, we can still have a great life.
I love that. That's a great note to finish on. We can still have a great life. Thank you so much for being on today, Sheri. Greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you so much for tuning into The Hidden Truth. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. It is so important that these stories are heard so that we continue to raise awareness and support victim survivors in their healing journey. For those who've been affected but haven't found your voice yet, I hope these stories inspire you to keep moving forward on your healing journey. Take care.